Welcome to another episode of A Life Less Ordinary. I'm out here in the Sedona Desert with my companion Garuda, and we're planning something very special this evening. We're about to shoot a night photo with the constellation Orion rising above Sedona's iconic red rocks, with myself and Garuda underneath the night sky. But for today's vlog, I'm going to take you back to Flagstaff, where I photographed an incredible sunset time-lapse from high above the Arizona Snowbowl at about 9,200 feet. And I'm going to walk you through how to do a time-lapse of your own using the Holy Grail method, which is how you capture the light transitioning seamlessly from day to night. So grab your tripod, grab your camera, and let's dive in. I'm Madhavan, photographer, adventurer, storyteller. For the next year, I have decided to live fully on the road, exploring this beautiful world, one breathtaking vista at a time, capturing its magic through my lens and sharing my journey with you. Join me as we explore, create, and inspire. Time-lapse photography is a magical way to capture the passage of time. But if you've ever tried to shoot a sunset that transitions into night, you'll know that balancing exposure across such dynamic lighting conditions is tricky. And this is where the Holy Grail method comes in. The Holy Grail is all about managing exposure changes as the light shifts. A sunset can go from bright and colorful to dark and moody in just minutes, and the camera's auto settings can't handle that gracefully. This is where manual adjustments come in. As the light changes, you gradually tweak your shutter speed and then your ISO. The goal is to maintain a consistent exposure across the entire time lapse. For this shoot, I arrived early to scout the perfect spot. The Arizona Snowbowl sits at about 9,200 feet and has breathtaking views of the San Francisco peaks overlooking Flagstaff's high desert landscape. Once I locked in my composition, I set up my intervalometer to capture a shot every 10 seconds. Why 10 seconds? Well, I've found that for sunrises and sunsets, 10 seconds is a pretty good rule of thumb to capture the sun's movement as it rises or sets, but definitely play around with this as you build experience. Now, a quick definition. The interval is not the amount of time the shutter is open. That's the shutter speed. Nor is the interval the amount of time that the shutter is closed. That's the buffer interval. The interval is the time from when the shutter opens to the time it opens again. In between that, the shutter opens, closes, the camera writes information to the memory card, and then the shutter opens again. That's the interval. Now, if you have a shutter speed of, let's say, 5 seconds, you could, in theory, set the interval to 5 seconds. But that doesn't give the camera any time to write to the card. So you need to leave time to write to the card. And since we're going to be adjusting settings over time as the light changes, you need to give yourself some time to adjust the settings after the shutter closes. Here's how you find the intervalometer. I use a Canon, so I'll explain the menu from Canon's perspective. Your own camera model should be fairly similar. The intervalometer is found in the camera menu. That's the first icon on the left. I've actually saved it to my starred menu since I use it so often. Either way, whatever works for you. Click on the intervalometer or interval timer, and you'll come to this screen. Now, before enabling the intervalometer, you need to set the details. Click on Info Detail Set on the lower left, and you'll come to this screen. Here, you tell the camera what interval you want. We've decided to go with 10 seconds, as you can see. You also choose the number of shots to take, or leave them at 0, for unlimited, which means the camera keeps firing until you either turn the camera off or it runs out of battery. Side note, a pet peeve of mine. If you're listening, Canon, give us the ability to set number of shots greater than 99. Often with time lapses, I'll be shooting 500 to 600 shots. It's easy enough to add another digit to this counter. Okay, off my soapbox. Click OK, which brings you back to this screen. Click Enable, and now we're all set. Now, with a sunset time lapse, I'm typically going to start at ISO 100 and f11. I'll set the shutter speed to whatever it needs to be to center the exposure meter. That's this meter down here. Once I've dialed in all my settings, I press the shutter. Now the camera goes to work and starts taking shots every 10 seconds. As it does, I keep watching that exposure meter. As it starts to drop by 1/3 of an increment, 2/3 of an increment, and finally a full increment, I increase shutter speed by 3 clicks. That should bring the exposure meter back to center. I'll keep doing this as the sun goes down. Now, as sunset approaches, and once the sun fully sets, the light will change rapidly. You'll be increasing shutter speed more and more frequently. Keep an eye on that shutter speed. You don't want the shutter speed to get too close to the interval because then you have no time to make adjustments. My own rule of thumb is when the shutter speed hits half the interval, in this case, that's 5 seconds. That's when I stop adjusting shutter speed, and any further adjustments I do with ISO. So I will start increasing ISO. The aperture remains fixed for the entire duration. With ISO, again, same thing. Every 3 drops of the exposure meter, I increase ISO by 3 clicks. And that's it. When you're done, you'll have a series of images. If you try to make a video out of these, you'll get something like this. Notice how everything looks fine in the beginning while the light is remaining constant. But once the sun begins to set and the light starts to change, you get this flickering phenomenon. And it becomes more rapid as the light starts to dim even more. And that's because as the sun sets and as the light changes, you're changing the exposure settings, and the camera reads that as an increase in light. And so when you play that back as a movie, you get this flickering effect every time you adjust those settings. So you take these raw files and put them into another software called LR Timelapse, which I'm not going to cover in this tutorial because that would require its own separate tutorial. But LR Timelapse then smooths out all of that flickering and creates a final smooth and polished image that looks like this. And that's how you create a stunning day-to-night sunset time-lapse using the Holy Grail method. If you found this tutorial useful, hit like and subscribe, and forward this to 1 or 2 of your friends. I'd love to see what you create with your own time-lapse. Drop me a comment and include your time-lapse in the comments below. And until then, keep exploring, keep creating, and keep living a life less ordinary. And wish me luck tonight.